My sister called me just after 11 on a Tuesday night, her voice stripped down to almost nothing. I was still at my desk at the forensic accounting firm where I work in Calgary, cross-referencing a client's balance sheet for a fraud investigation I'd been running for 6 weeks. When her number lit up my screen, I already knew it wasn't a casual call. My sister never phones late. She texts, always. I picked up before the second ring. She didn't say hello. What she said was, "He told me I have nothing, that I'll sign whatever he puts in front of me, or he'll make sure I end up owing money I don't even understand." Her breathing was shallow and fast, the kind of breathing you do when you're trying very hard not to cry in front of someone. He said if I get a lawyer, he'll file first and freeze everything before I can touch a single dollar. I set down my pen. My brother-in-law had said those words to my sister in the hallway of the house she'd helped pay for. In the city they'd built a life in together. He thought she was alone. He thought she had no one to call. He had never once thought about me. My name is Freya. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 4 years I've worked as a forensic accountant specializing in financial crime and asset tracing. My job on a good day is to follow money that powerful people try very hard to make disappear. I am, for lack of a better description, very good at finding things that were never supposed to be found. Before I tell you exactly what happened over the next 72 hours, and exactly how completely my brother-in-law's carefully constructed life came apart at the seams, if you believe that protecting the people you love sometimes means going to war on their behalf, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is worth your time. My sister had been married for 7 years. Her husband was a residential real estate developer in Calgary, the kind of man who wore his wealth like a second skin and cultivated the appearance of generosity while keeping exhaustive private track of every dollar he considered his. He had a habit of calling her the face of the operation at dinner parties, which was his way of reminding her, publicly and with a smile, that she was decorative. She'd left a career in urban planning to support his company in the early years, handling permits, community consultations, zoning applications, real skilled work that he credited entirely to himself. By the time she called me that Tuesday night, she had already discovered what he was doing. She'd found the documents by accident. She'd been looking for their home insurance renewal on his laptop. He always handled the paperwork, and instead found a folder of corporate registrations, numbered companies, 3 of them, registered in Alberta over the past 8 months, each one holding title to a different investment property they'd purchased together, properties that on paper no longer belonged to either of them, properties that had been quietly transferred into corporate shells he alone controlled. He was building himself a separate financial world, one she couldn't touch in a divorce. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. He told her to be realistic. He told her she'd contributed nothing that couldn't be replaced. He told her that the way the paperwork was structured, she would walk away with the equity in the family home and gratitude that he wasn't being harder on her. And then, when she said she was going to speak to a lawyer, he put his hand flat against the wall beside her head and told her that if she pushed him, he would make the process so expensive and so drawn out and so humiliating that she would wish she hadn't. She didn't call the police, she called me. I arrived at her house on Wednesday morning while he was at his office downtown. She met me at the door looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not physically smaller, but compressed, like someone who'd been bracing for impact for so long that it had changed the shape of how she held herself. We sat at her kitchen table with coffee going cold between us, and she showed me everything she'd found. I opened my laptop, I pulled up the Alberta Corporate Registry, I opened the Canada Revenue Agency's business number database, and I started tracing. Within an hour, I had a picture that was considerably uglier than what my sister had described. The 3 numbered companies weren't just holding the investment properties. One of them, registered 8 months ago, right around when he would have first started planning the divorce, had taken on a secured line of credit. A home equity line of credit, $240,000, drawn against the primary residence. The house my sister lived in. The house registered in both their names. The problem was the signature on the HELOC application. It was my sister's, except my sister had never signed it. I kept my voice completely even. I have learned, through years of fraud work, that the moment you show someone the full scope of what's been done to them, they tend to either shut down or spiral. Neither is useful when you have limited time. So I told her what I'd found the way I would tell a client, factually, sequentially, without editorial. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then she said very quietly, "He forged my signature on a bank document." "Yes," I said. "That's a crime." "Yes," I said, "it is." She exhaled slowly. Something shifted in her face. Not anger exactly, more like the particular clarity that arrives when you finally see the full shape of what you've been dealing with, like the last piece of a very bad puzzle locking into place. "What do we do?" she asked. I told her we had 2 tracks running at the same time. The first was legal, and it was going to take a few days to build properly. She needed a family lawyer and a criminal lawyer, and she needed them now. I gave her the name of a solicitor I'd worked alongside on 2 separate financial crime files. One of the sharpest lawyers in the city, someone who specialized in complex asset division and did not frighten easily. The second track was mine. I needed every document she could get me. Bank statements, property purchase records, the corporate registration certificates, anything bearing a signature. And I needed to look at the home network router logs, because I wanted to see whether there were any digital traces of when those corporate transfer documents had been accessed and from which device. She gave me everything. I spent Wednesday afternoon and most of Wednesday night at that kitchen table. My brother-in-law came home at 6, registered my presence with visible irritation, said something dismissive about how nice it was that I had time to visit, and retreated to his home office. He didn't know the specifics of what I did for a living. My sister had mentioned it once, years ago at a family gathering, and he'd moved on from the topic with the particular speed of someone who finds other people's work interesting only when it benefits him directly. That was his second mistake. His first was forging a signature on a federally regulated financial instrument. By Thursday morning, I had the full picture of the scheme. The 3 numbered companies had been set up through a corporate law firm in Edmonton, likely chosen because it was far enough from Calgary that the local development community wouldn't immediately recognize the connection. The HELOC had been drawn down in 2 tranches. The funds had moved through one of the numbered companies and out to a holding account in British Columbia. He'd used the address of a commercial property he owned to establish the company addresses, making them harder to trace back to the family home in a quick search. It was sophisticated, it was patient, it had clearly been planned for a long time. And it fell apart entirely the moment someone with the right training looked at it properly. There was something else, something I hadn't anticipated. One of the numbered companies, the most recently registered, listed a director whose name I didn't recognize. Not my brother-in-law. A woman. I ran her name through the registry. She appeared as a director on 4 separate numbered companies, 3 of which shared an address with his development firm's registered office. I thought about the timeline, the sudden urgency to restructure assets, the new company, the shared address. I sent a secure message to a contact at FinTrack, the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center, the federal body that monitors suspicious financial activity across Canada. I'd worked alongside their investigators on a case the previous year, and I had a professional relationship with one of their senior analysts. I asked her, off the record, whether the account numbers I'd found in the document trail matched anything in their system. She responded within 4 hours. The account had been flagged 18 months earlier for structuring, a pattern of deposits made just below the threshold that triggers mandatory reporting. It had been monitored since. They already had a file on the numbered company and on the woman listed as its director. She was not a passive associate. She had helped him design the entire shell structure, knowingly and for commission, while he moved assets that legally belonged to my sister into accounts my sister didn't know existed. I called the family solicitor I'd referred my sister to and laid out what I had. There was a brief silence and then, "Send me everything. I'll have an emergency application ready to file tomorrow afternoon." "He's planning to file himself," I said. Friday, he mentioned it to her Wednesday evening. "Then we file Thursday at 4:30, she said, before the courts close. That Thursday evening, my brother-in-law announced at dinner, in the tone of a man who considers a courtesy announcement to be an act of generosity, that he had a professional engagement Friday evening. The annual Real Estate Excellence Awards, hosted by the Calgary Real Estate Development Association, held at a hotel downtown. He was nominated in the residential development category. He expected my sister to attend and to conduct herself in a way that reflected well on him. He looked at me briefly when he said it. He was making clear I was not included. I smiled pleasantly and said I had somewhere to be anyway. Friday afternoon at 4:27, the emergency application was filed in the Court of King's Bench. It included a restraining order on the disposition of any assets registered to my brother-in-law, personally or through numbered corporations, pending full financial disclosure. It included a motion to freeze the HELOC account. Attached as exhibits was a preliminary forensic accounting report I had written myself, sworn as a commissioned document, detailing the forged signature, the asset transfers, and the structured deposit pattern. At 4:53, the duty judge granted the interim order. I got the confirmation on my phone while I was getting ready in the hotel lobby washroom. The awards dinner was held in a ballroom on the second floor, the kind of event that smells like expensive catering and carefully managed networking, packed with developers and municipal politicians who make a point of being photographed together. My sister Saul arrived with my brother-in-law. She was at his table near the front, in a dark blue dress, her expression carefully neutral in the way she had become very skilled at maintaining. I was seated near the back with the solicitor beside me, and a representative from the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit 2 chairs down. He was not in uniform. He was drinking sparkling water and looking unhurriedly at his phone. The woman who had structured the shell companies was also in the room. She was at a table 2 rows over, in a charcoal blazer, speaking to someone from the development community. She didn't know who I was. The awards program ran for 45 minutes. My brother-in-law won his category. He walked to the podium, collected the trophy, and gave a speech about vision and community and building things that last. He thanked his wife. He made it sound like generosity. He came back to the table. He leaned close to my sister and said something near her ear. I could see from across the room the precise moment her shoulders tightened. She stood up. She excused herself from the table and walked, unhurried, toward the small raised platform at the side of the stage where the MC had a secondary microphone set up. The MC was speaking to someone on the far side of the room. My sister stepped up, adjusted the microphone, and said, clearly with no particular inflection, "I'm sorry to interrupt, I need just 2 minutes." The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something unexpected happens, and people can't yet determine whether it's a speech or a scene. My brother-in-law turned around. My sister said her name, the name she'd had before the marriage, which she had quietly and legally reverted to 2 days earlier on her solicitor's advice. She said that her husband, and she used the word the way you use a word you have decided to stop using, had transferred jointly held investment properties, worth approximately $2.3 million into numbered companies he alone controlled. She said that a forged signature in her name had been used to secure a $240,000 home equity line of credit against the family home, without her knowledge or consent. She said that an interim order had been granted that afternoon by the Court of King's Bench, freezing those assets pending full financial disclosure, and that a referral had been made to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit regarding the forged document. She said all of this in the same tone she might use to describe the weather. The room held completely still. My brother-in-law pushed back his chair. He stood up. He said her name, the old name, the one she was no longer using, in the tone I recognized from years of watching him manage her, the tone that meant, "You have gone too far, and I am about to make you aware of what that costs." The RCMP officer at my table stood up. He walked calmly toward my brother-in-law's table. He produced his identification and said something I couldn't hear from where I was sitting, but I could see the exact moment my brother-in-law understood what was happening. It was visible in the way the color left his face and his hand dropped to his side. The woman in the charcoal blazer was already moving toward the exit. A second officer who had been stationed near the back wall the entire evening stepped smoothly into her path and introduced himself. I stayed where I was. My sister stepped down from the platform, smoothed the front of her dress, and walked back toward the table to collect her coat and bag. She did not look at him. She did not look at the room. She moved past his table the way you walk past something that no longer has anything to do with you. I met her at the door. We went downstairs to the hotel lobby and sat near the window while sleet came down against the glass. She ordered tea. I ordered coffee. She looked, for the first time in longer than I could track, like she could breathe all the way down. There was one more thing I hadn't told her yet. Our parents had invested a significant portion of their retirement savings, a private arrangement, handled on a handshake and a promissory note, into one of my brother-in-law's development projects 3 years earlier. When I'd traced the money through the shell company structure, I found that capital had been redirected into the same holding account the HELOC funds had gone to. Their retirement money had, in practical terms, already been moved out of reach. I told her. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she looked tired but not surprised. "Of course he did," she said. "They're going to need their own legal advice," I said, "separate from yours." She nodded slowly. "They're going to blame me for this." "Probably," I said for a while. She looked out at the sleet. "I don't have the energy right now to manage their feelings about a mess he made." "You don't have to," I said. "That's not your job anymore." She picked up her tea. Her hands were completely steady. The months that followed weren't simple or clean, because these things never are. The court process was methodical in the way Canadian civil proceedings are: careful, document-heavy, thorough. The interim asset freeze held. The criminal investigation into the forged HELOC document proceeded on a separate track and ultimately resulted in charges. The woman who had structured the shell companies accepted a plea arrangement in exchange for a full accounting of where the funds had moved, which made the civil recovery considerably more straightforward than it might otherwise have been. My sister came out of the divorce with what she should have had from the beginning: her fair share of 7 years of joint assets, properly valued, properly divided. She kept the family home. She walked away with everything she'd earned and nothing she hadn't. She went back to urban planning. She found a firm that was genuinely glad to have her experience, and within 8 months she was leading a community development project in a neighborhood she actually cared about. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. Our parents came around eventually. It took longer than it should have, and there were conversations along the way that left marks. But my sister handled it on her own terms, in her own time. She didn't rush forgiveness she didn't feel. She set a boundary and held it, and the people who loved her adjusted to meet it. I flew back to Calgary on a Monday in late March, the first real sunlight of the year finally cutting through the gray. My sister drove me to the airport, and we sat in the departure drop-off lane a few minutes longer than we needed to. "You know what I keep thinking about," she said. "What?" "That he thought the plan was airtight." She shook her head slightly. "He planned for everything. The numbered companies, the out-of-province firm, the timing. He accounted for every angle." A pause. "He just never thought to ask what my sister actually does for a living." "He didn't think it mattered," I said. "No," she said, "he really didn't." I grabbed my bag and got out. The airport doors were busy with the morning rush. I turned back one last time before I went in. "You know you don't need me for whatever comes next," I said. "I know," she said. "Good," I said, "because I'll be 3 provinces away and extremely unavailable." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that reaches all the way, and I knew she was going to be fine. Not because of anything I'd done. Because of what she'd chosen to do herself, on a Friday evening in front of an entire room full of people who had believed his version of things, when she stepped up to that microphone and told the truth out loud. That was hers, all of it. If her story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting someone you love, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury it, subscribe to Furry Revenge. There are more stories here worth hearing.